We're a couple minutes in, so we're going to go ahead and get started. First of all, thank you for joining us today. I'm very excited for today's panel. We have some esteemed guests that are part of our Center for Inclusive Education alumni community as IRACDA scholars, which you will hear a little bit more of. I'm going to actually pass it over to Kaitlyn Wright, who will help moderate and facilitate today's panel. Kaitlyn?
Hello, everyone. I am Kaitlyn Wright. I'm the Assistant Dean for Diversity and Inclusion for the Graduate School here at Stony Brook, also Director of the Center for Inclusive Education, which is the administrative home of the IRACDA program. The center, in case you're not familiar with the center, we are an umbrella unit that houses a number of diversity initiatives. And one of those initiatives is our IRACDA postdoctoral training program. And this program is focused on preparing biomedical scientists for careers in academia. It is a postdoctoral training program for over the course of 3 years, where our postdocs are not only engaging in high impact research, but they're also learning techniques for how to teach. And then they get an opportunity to practice those techniques in the classroom in one of our partner institutions. And right now we have 4 partner institutions. So our scholars really get a nice taste of what it would be to teach at different types of institutions. One is the community college and Suffolk County Community College. We have a school that was founded as more of a technical institute in Farmingdale State College. We have a very traditional undergraduate institution in SUNY Old Westbury, and we have a comprehensive in CUNY Brooklyn College. So these are the places where our IRACDA scholars have an opportunity to teach and get feedback on their teaching and be mentored by instructors at those institutions. So today we are really excited that we have 5 of our alum who have come back to talk about their experience. They completed the IRACDA program, and now they're in various types of positions within education, but not what you would traditionally think of, right? And so we thought it would be a great idea to bring these amazing individuals back to talk about their journey and the work that they do and their careers. And so I don't want to take up too much time talking. I want you to hear from them. So I'm going to just tell you who they are, and then I'm going to give them an opportunity to talk more about their path. So first, from our 5th cohort of IRACDA scholars, who was with us from 2016 to 2019, we have Dr. Antonio Herrara. And Antonio is currently a research instructor at Baylor boarding school. So Dr. Herrara, you can just wave, and then I'll give you a chance to say a little bit more later on. We have Dr. Adonis McQueen from our 6th cohort, and he was with us from 2017 to 2020. Adonis is now a proposal development coordinator right here at Stony Brook, so we can't wait to hear more about that. We have Dr. Jennifer Blackwell, who was a member of our 8th cohort from August 2019 to 2022. And Dr. Blackwell is now a Neuroscience Education Program Manager at Brown University. We have Dr. Kaitlyn Thompson, also from cohort 8. And Kaitlyn was with us from 2019 to 2020. And so Kaitlyn left us right around the time that the pandemic was going on. If you remember, there was quite a bit happening in 2020, and Kaitlyn found herself as at Copiague School District as a science research teacher. And then we have Dr. David Gray, who was with us from 2020 to 2021 in our 9th cohort. And Dr. Gray is also in an alternate field, which is Assistant Director of the Undergraduate Research Center at UCLA. So we're all over the country, which is really exciting. And you're going to get to hear from each of our panelists today. So for our panelists, I'm going to ask you we're just going to open up with you telling us a little bit more about how you ended up in your current role and a little of what you do. What does your day-to-day kind of look like in the role that you're in right now? And so we're going to start in that same order. So we'll go from Antonio to Adonis, to Jennifer, to Kaitlyn, and then to David. All right, so we'll start with Antonio. Take it away.
All right. Hi. So thanks again for having us. This is a really interesting opportunity to go ahead and talk about our different paths and career choices. For me, IRACDA was a really good opportunity to be able to get some good training, to learn how to do pedagogy and how to be effective in the classroom, and also how to be effective at classroom management. But additionally, it also gave me a really good chance at being able to network with basically anybody and everybody from my PhD cohort all the way to people I used to do alumni interviewing with. So right as I was exiting from the IRACDA program, I was just approached by a friend of mine who was looking for a biology lecturer position at Pace University in FIDI. And I did that for about a year, and it was a really great experience being able to teach in the lab and teach people how to do some basic molecular biology. But then I started looking around for some teaching positions, and that happened to be right when the pandemic struck. So the only thing I was able to actually find was a online teaching position at a boarding high school called Choate Rosemary Hall. It turns out that I happened to have actually interviewed there years before. And even though that that time of my interviewing for that position, they went with another candidate, I had, of course, replied very graciously to their email and said, do me a favor, keep me in mind for any future opportunities that might arise. And future opportunity did come up, and they reached out to me and they said they needed somebody who could step in and hit the ground running when it came to teaching online. And again, having had the IRACDA training, I'd already known how to handle different kind of LMS systems, and it was fairly seamless. Um, while at Choate, I was actually remote the entire time. I had a brief Zoom meeting with the dean of faculty and approached him. I was like, so when you're looking for talent or new faculty positions, who is it that you actually talk to? And the dean of faculty, this guy named Dr. White, connected me to a recruitment agency called Carney Sando. That then took my portfolio, took my information, and then proceeded to just give me opportunity after opportunity after opportunity that I interviewed, and ultimately landed a really nice position in Chattanooga, Tennessee, where I am bringing university level research to the high school. So we have funding for research, we have decent equipment, and what I am also really enjoying is the fact is that I don't have to teach any core curricular classes. I just teach research. Um, so I work with students all the way from sophomore year all the way to senior year. I get my summers off, all the holidays, everything you expect from that. But I have the beauty of being able to do, real research without actually having to write grants. So um, I can keep talking, but I think it's about time to pass it on to Adonis.
Thanks for that, Antonio. And thank you, Karen, for putting all this together. As she mentioned, my name is Adonis McQueen. I'm currently a proposal development coordinator at Stony Brook University. How I got into this role is a little twist and turning in terms of my career. After I was done with the IRACDA program, I was very interested in looking into data science. So for a couple of years after IRACDA, I enrolled in a boot camp and was eventually hired at a software company called GCOM, located in Maryland. And it was a rewarding experience. I really learned a lot, but the wave of tech layoffs, I'm not sure if you all have been keeping up with the news or know about this, but the wave of tech layoffs that was hitting, the FANG companies like Facebook, Amazon, Google, Netflix, that were hitting them in after the pandemic, like in 2021, 2022, eventually hit our company in 2023, and I was unfortunately laid off. As a result of that, I decided to branch out my interest a little bit more because, part of me missed academia, part of me missed the classroom. And so through some networking, talking to Carrie and figuring out some other roles that might be available, I fell into this role for proposal development. And it's really interesting because this role is within under the Office of the Vice President of Research here at Stony Brook University. And what we do is we offer grant development and proposal services to the faculty. So the faculty have to fill out a form if they want us to assist them filling out grants. And IRACDA was actually really great in helping me prepare for this role, because while I was doing my research, I applied for the F32 fellowship through the NIH. So, I already had a good amount of experience with the technical aspect of applying for grants. But with this role, you have to be more observant with the compliant nature of the government documents and things for that. So we help faculty put together their budgets, help them navigate the various proposal sites like NSF, NIH, DOE, and other federal funding organizations that fund their research. We make sure that everyone gets their documents in on time and kind of just help the PIs with a lot of the admin legwork. So that way they can just focus on developing the technical aspects of the grants and proposals and not have to worry about so much of the admin. And so my day to day looks like reviewing documents, making sure that they're compliant against the regulatory documents that the state offers. And one thing I do like about this role is that I can now fully encompass the grant process. Like, I can write the technical aspects of the research while also constructing the budgets for myself, constructing the letters of support and letters of collaboration that you might want to get from industry partners and other people on campus. So that way the proposal is fully compliant and can be accepted without getting rejected for little nitpicky things that some of these organizations like to do. Like, oh, this person did not list this specific position in their resume, or this person did not comply with what we wanted in this other section of admin documents, and your entire proposal can get rejected if you don't meet some of those requirements. And so, it can be heartbreaking to have a fantastic idea for your research and then not be able to get funded because one of your collaborators did not fill out a form correctly. So we work to make sure that none of that happens. And we have a lot of success with getting faculty funding for their proposals whenever they use our services. And with that, I'll pass it to Jennifer.
Hi, everyone. I'm also super excited to be here. I always loved going to career panels because I had no idea what I wanted to do. And it's something that I always found really helpful. And I guess to start a little bit of my journey was kind of going into research, thinking I was definitely going to stay and do research, and then discovered that I was not passionate enough to make up for what I struggled with, which was a lot of failure and rejection, which I took very personally. And that was a real struggle for me to deal with. But there were aspects of it that I enjoyed. And there were pieces, I learned so much that I find incredibly helpful just in life in general. But I think when I was really struggling in grad school, I started doing outreach as something else to do. And I kind of fell in love with that kind of teaching and education equity. And that's why I decided to pursue the IRACDA postdoc. And I really loved the teaching, but it was, I think, generally started thinking more about just general just being able to support students. And so I think at the time that I applied for this job, I wasn't I definitely wanted to go into administration, but it was definitely yeah, that could be something that I would be interested in. And this was just kind of something that a lab mate found the job ad for and sent it to me. And I was like, wow, this sounds amazing, because it was in a neuroscience department, which would have kind of eases my personal transition out of doing research. I'm still kind of staying in my field a little bit. And it was a newly created position. So there was a lot of flexibility in me kind of being able to develop things that I'm interested in. And it was working with undergrad and graduate students. So I am basically, in my position for the undergraduate portion, is a little bit more just on helping with advising and for students that are interested in the neuroscience concentration, which is what they call majors here. And then I've also been able to help with developing a new concentration here, which has been kind of fun. And then I think the bulk of what I'm doing is working with graduate students, and it is a lot of like support and running the program, and developing workshops for them and supporting, and I definitely do a lot of advising for them. And I've been doing some mediating conversations as well, which I'll talk about if we talk about struggles. But it's something that I really enjoy and find very rewarding. I love organizing things. I'm not ashamed to admit it. It's something that I also get to do here, to really help streamline the program. And I'm involved in discussions around our curriculum and how we run our program. And I really enjoy being part of the conversations, an important part of the conversation, someone that other people, the faculty, also listen to, about what we want the graduate students to be learning and throughout their PhD. So yeah, that's me.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kaitlyn. Thank you again for inviting me. I'm very excited as well to be here. And it's great to see everybody again. So my path has been a little strange and long. Before I got my PhD, I actually got a master's in teaching. I thought I wanted to be a high school chemistry teacher. I had a year's worth of experience doing like a leave and substituting as a permanent sub in science. And I, at that point in my life, was like, no high school students for me. I think I want to teach undergrad. So did a bit of research on what that would look like. Realized I needed to get a PhD. I did have like a passion for research, but my heart always like really was focused on science education. As I got my PhD at Stony Brook as well, loved research. I was like, ooh, like maybe I do want to go like full academia all the way, like graduate school, grant writing, running a lab. And then I would see like the struggles of actually getting the money and that stressed me out big time. So then I was like, no, like follow your heart, go, I want the student contact. And then as I learned more about this field, I was like, oh, it's really tough to get like an undergrad position that focuses more on teaching than research, really. And I wasn't really willing to move off Long Island either. All my family is here. My husband is here. So I was like, this is going to be hard. But I was really like excited that the IRACDA program was also at Stony Brook, didn't have to move off Long Island, was focused on teaching. You could make connections with places that were a little more teaching focused as opposed to research focused. So that was wonderful. And then as Karian mentioned, I left a bit early during the pandemic, just emotionally, financially, things going on with my family. I worked from home for a year as a medical writer. Absolutely hated that. I've confirmed that education was for me because I missed the classroom. I missed like more hands-on research. And somehow, I don't even know what made me do it, but I looked on like a high school listing. If anyone is familiar with high school teaching, there's a system called OLAS for New York. And I saw science research teacher. And I was like, oh my gosh, like this would be a dream. Like it's very student facing, but it's also about research. So my position actually sounds very similar to what Antonio does as well, where you're just really like cultivating high school students to hopefully love research. And it was ironically at the school district where my dad worked for 30 years. So it just felt like stars were aligning. I had observed there when I was getting my master's in teaching, so I knew the chair of the science department. I contacted her. Immediately, she brought me in for an interview. I did a demo lesson. And I have to say, like, it feels like my twisted journey, like, all led me here. It's only been 3 years. Hoping in the next few years to get tenure there. So it is like still a tenure deal, but just like Antonia said, summer's off, holidays off. Although, my students are they never really let me rest fully, but it's a very rewarding position to be in, and to see students then go on to follow like a similar path to what I went through is like really awesome. So with that, I'll pass it on to David.
Hey, morning for me, afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. It's great to see all the familiar faces and some new ones. So yeah, as Kerrigan said, I am one of the assistant directors for UCLA's Undergraduate Research Center in Sciences, which is a kind of strange position that wasn't my original plan, but it's worked out great. So I guess I'll back up a little bit before I get to the current role. So as I think probably everyone in this room, I really love teaching, and kind of during graduate school, I had that clarity that, you know, I want this to be a significant portion of my career. It's working with students, and generally working with undergraduates is kind of what I had identified already as where I wanted to be during my PhD. That's what led me to pursue the IRACDA program, where I got formal training and felt ready to go. And during the postdoc too, I had some clarity too that I didn't really want to lead like an R1 lab. I kind of had that insight, like the realities that came with that, applying for grants, skewing a little more towards research than teaching. I kind of identified that it wasn't the exact path that I wanted to be on. I was looking for something that was a heavier slant towards teaching than research. So at that point, I was kind of thinking, you know, working at a PUI, a primarily undergraduate institution, but I'm from California and wanted eventually to be back in Southern California. And it turns out there's not a ton of PUIs in California. There are a few out there, but so then I was thinking maybe, you know, community college faculty route or something along those lines. And then kind of earlier in the process, because I also left early after about a year, I wasn't doing a job hunt. I wasn't actively looking. But I just kind of stumbled across a job posting on my LinkedIn. So it was at UCLA, which was where I did both my undergrad and grad school. So my kind of second home. It let me teach. It's an academic staff position. So I'm on the, you know, the green list of people who can teach courses at UCLA. I mentor students. I run a lot of scholarship programs. I have a lot of FaceTime with the students. And it also has, you know, security, which I think was what was pushing me away from the traditional lecturer path, where it's sometimes a bit of an insecure job, depending on the exact situation you end up in. So it kind of checked all of the boxes, and ended up a bit serendipitous that I had my current boss. I had met her previously when I was at UCLA, and that's how I stumbled across this job posting. So I applied. It ended up being a perfect fit. I had to leave fairly abruptly, so I apologize again for that. I know it took you. I was set up to do my teaching placement with the IRACDA program in like 2 weeks, and I had asked for my current boss if I could have like could I come after the semester, and got a hard no. So that was so I packed up my stuff and flew the cats across the country, and ended up back at UCLA. So it's been a great role. Our center, our main objectives are to help undergraduates connect with research opportunities on campus, support them while they're there in a lot of different ways, through workshops, through programming, through scholarships. We're active on campus, and then we help them as well as they prepare to apply for graduate schools. So my particular role, I have about 5 programs that I'm responsible for, that I lead. I developed curriculum for them. I've got to build 2 new classes from scratch, which was fun to, you know, put into practice what I learned through the IRACDA program. And I teach 2 or 3 classes each quarter, and I run a summer molecular biology boot camp. And it's been just a great role that just kind of, it was serendipitous how it all worked out. It definitely wasn't the original plan, but I'm happy where I ended up. So that's my story.
Thank you so much, David, and for all of our panelists for sharing your journeys with us. That each one of you had a unique journey, but it's really interesting to see how it led you to where you are today. So we do have some questions that were submitted to us by the folks who registered for the event. We also have a Q&A option within Zoom. So I do want to offer those of you who are here to put your questions in the Q&A, or you can raise your hand if you don't mind unmuting yourself and speaking and just sharing your question orally. You could do that as well. But I'm going to kick us off with one of the first questions that we received prior, and anyone can answer. We don't necessarily need to go in any order, and everyone doesn't have to answer every question, because there's 5 of you, and we want to make sure we can get to as many questions as we can. But if there's something you want to add, of course, please add. So we'll start with one of I think we've gotten more than one version of this question, which is, what are some of the skills and experiences you gained within the IRACDA program, or just on your journey that really prepared you for the position that you have right now? So some of you mentioned a little bit of this, but if there's anything you'd like to add, or someone else who hadn't mentioned what experience prepared you or really are helpful now that you're in the position that you have. Antonio?
Yeah, I can go ahead and start with that. One of the things that was really cool about the IRACDA program was not just the pedagogy training and getting the classroom experience, but it was also in learning how to navigate admin type environments, and how there's actually a very collaborative and very collegial kind of a community. So oftentimes committees will get formed. And this is something that I'm sure we all have in all of our different positions. We all have meetings that we need to attend to, and these different committees that end up forming. And I think one of the most valuable experiences I had from IRACDA was actually being able to do things like lead, little seminars, like responsibility in research conduct, and like truthfulness in reporting, and little things like that were not necessarily part of the main curriculum of IRACDA, but were really interesting opportunities that actually ended up preparing me well for my current position. Because one thing that they like to do here is that they like to try to maintain our professional development. So we end up having these quote unquote professional learning communities all of the time, and the ability to whip up 20 slides on something that is like responsibility of conduct research, or biology of ethics, or anything about invasive species, to serve as an additional academic resource for your colleagues to help them in their professional development, I found to be very, very useful, and not something I would have expected walking into IRACDA.
Thanks, Antonio. Does anyone want to add to that? Go ahead, Kaitlyn.
Yeah, I would love to add to that. I agree with everything that Antonio just said, but what jumped into my mind as well, I was there primarily for the pedagogy training, and it had been 10 years since I did any like pedagogical, like formal training, and education has continued to evolve so much since that time. So I was so thankful that I had that year, like the workshops with Kim, the journal clubs with all of our cohorts together, reading research in science education and pedagogy, like helped me realize like what it is now. And at the high school level, they're looking for the same, kind of techniques, inquiry-based learning, stuff like that. Like it's all very aligned with what we learned for the undergraduate level too. So I just was like very thankful to be like brought up to date in IRACDA. Like I think it prepared me really well to re-enter secondary education too.
Thanks, Kaitlyn. And I just want to mention, for those of you who are on the Zoom right now who are not within the IRACDA program, that these things are available to you when those sessions are being offered through the Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching. They are open to anyone at Stony Brook who's interested in learning more about these techniques, evidence-based teaching techniques. So you can get some more information about that. Kim Bell is actually on Zoom with you right now. So if you want more information, feel free to send her a direct message, and she can make sure you have that information so that you can benefit as well. Thank you so much, Antonio and Kaitlyn. So there's a question that was put in the chat, which is, how is work-life balance, and how has your job affected your lifestyle? I think that's a really good question. Yeah, Jennifer.
So good. My work-life balance is so much better than it was as a grad student. I definitely feel for my position, most of the time, I really am working like within work hours, and most of the year outside of admissions period, I'm like not having to work weekends. We get a lot of vacation time. And it's a very different environment working in an office with staff and not researchers, where they also very much believe in the like, I work at work and I go home, and those things are very separate. So it's nice to have that around me, because it definitely enforces and validates feeling like I want to go home and do things for myself. And have my weekends, I don't look at emails, and you should not expect me to look at my emails when I'm on vacation. So I'm really happy.
I'll chime in. Yeah, so I'd say echo the same sentiments too. So the work-life balance is coming from a research background, as we all are. It's a night and day difference. It's very nice. I do definitely still have some bad habits where I'll check emails after hours, or I'll go on vacation, and if I get something urgent that I can answer in a couple lines, I shouldn't, but I do. But it's really it's nice. It's nice to not have that pressure. Like, I can clock out at 5 and my day's done. I've worked my hours. So I think that's a big benefit to this type of position. I think it's been great for my mental health and all of that. So, and I want to, if I could backtrack a second on the previous question that I was too slow to jump in on. I benefited from a ton of things, but it's Kim's lectures and building syllabi and all of that. But I also want to specifically shout out the Alan Alda Center course, because one of the classes I built was on science communication, and I drew heavily. I'm not from an improv background, so I kind of cut some of those exercises, but I really enjoyed that class, and I built a lot of it into my curriculum that I think then my students liked. So that was another really tangible thing that I pulled and reapplied. But yeah, also great work-life balance.
I could actually chime in here too. I really, really love the Alan Alda Center, and it's actually something I still talk about in terms of how, just even having a little bit of practice of improv and just trying to say yes and really is helpful when it comes to your students, because sometimes they come up with the most off-the-wall random things that they're asking you about, and you don't want to shut them down. You don't want to stuff with that creativity. So you oftentimes have to go yes and then let's go this direction. So that was very, very useful. I would actually offer a little bit different in terms of the work-life balance. So, I happen to be in a boarding school environment. I don't live on campus. I'm a day faculty, but I do participate a lot with the boarding school activities. So I'll take them to like movies and stuff like that and bowling on the weekends. But actually being in a fairly small town, I actually have to be very mindful of the fact that when I walk out into public, I'm wearing my Dr. Herrara Professor at Baylor hat, because it's not a tiny, tiny, tiny little place, but compared to the masses and the millions in New York City, there's a decent chance you're going to run into somebody, or even just taking some of my kids going out on a bamboo field trip to go collect samples from the field turns into local news. And to then have yourself recognized in the grocery store because you're that guy with those kids with those bamboo leaves, really, 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 makes it so that you have to realize that there's that presence and the persona you have, even if you're just trying to do your, weekend grocery shopping, something like that. So there is enough of a balance in terms of truly, yeah, when I'm done with the day. I don't answer emails. Like, I even go so far as to breaks, I uninstall Outlook and don't even allow myself to receive it on my cell phone, because I'm addicted to my emails. So I have to do something that drastic in order to make that separation. The other thing too is my students are very, very keen, and they are all constantly messaging. Like, we have Teams apps, and they'll be like, "I'm sorry, Dr. Herrara, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. I know it's really inappropriate for me to message you like this, blah, blah, blah." And then I'll be like, I really shouldn't respond. I'm supposed to be asleep too, So it's like, I mean, sometimes it's really interesting about the science, or they're working on a project, and oftentimes it's them just going like, I'm besides myself, can I get an extension on the paper? Can you please help me, Dr. Herrara? So it takes a little bit of effort to not always be on all of the time and always be available. And it's very important to be able to set those boundaries so that you can find true balance between work and life.
Thank you for that, Antonio. That I think is really great advice across the board, right? Making sure we set boundaries. Go ahead, Kaitlyn. Looks like you were going to say something.
Yeah, I think kind of to tack on to what Antonio said, my first 2 years, this is my third year currently, I had the same thing. I had push notifications on Outlook and on the parent contact app that we use at my school. And I realized, why am I doing this? Like, it took a big toll, and I'm still working on drawing lines because I think coming from graduate school, this is just what you were used to. Like, you went home, opened the computer back up. I was like in bed answering emails, working on this, analyzing data, whatever it was. And so this year I've been trying more than ever. Like, I also uninstalled the parent app. I didn't uninstall Outlook, but I removed push notifications. So I have to actually check it in order to see if a student reached out, and I get the same thing. I'll get messages at 3 a.m., same kind of thing. Students, I'm like, don't check it because they're probably in crisis about an assignment. It's just going to stress you out for the rest of the night. So yeah, I think it takes a lot, especially like working with kids who care, which is a blessing and a curse at the same time, because they need you, which is awesome sometimes, but not when you are trying to have a personal life. So it takes a lot of, just like what he said, a lot of effort to draw the line.
So Kaitlyn, while you're still speaking, there is a question for you in our Q&A, which is, you already had a master's in education prior to getting your PhD and the IRACDA program. To work in a high school setting, would we need to go back to school for an education degree? Can you talk maybe more specifically about what further requirements would an IRACDA postdoc need in order to work in a high school setting?
That's a great question. It will vary district to district. So my district is incredibly like by the book. If I did not have the master's in teaching and my New York State teaching certification, they would not have hired me for this position. But I do know of other research teachers, and I think it's like almost in the title that the school districts work around it. There's a woman, for example, who works in the Copiague school district who I know doesn't have a master's in teaching, but she's almost like their coordinator for the research program. So it varies. It's not 100% necessary, but it will depend what's available at what district, because mine, I know I was an interesting case as well, because it had been so long since I taught at the high school level that my teaching certification had lapsed. But I was able, COVID actually worked in my favor. I got an emergency extension through COVID, and I just had to go back and take one chemistry content exam, and I got reissued my New York State certification. So I lucked out in that sense with this district. But again, I know of other districts that you don't need that. So it will just depend.
Thanks, Kaitlyn. So there's this question. A lot of you seem to have just fell into your current positions. Do you know of any resources or sites to find job postings for the positions that you're in?
I'll take this one because I am fresh off of the job search. So of course some of the mainstay sites are going to be like Indeed, LinkedIn, things like that. But one thing I want to kind of encourage people to do is to construct a list of your personal interests and then look for schools, corporations, government entities, or anything that specifically fit those interests, and then find roles on those sites directly. Something I found for sites like, especially LinkedIn is kind of notorious for this, is that a lot of businesses and some other recruiting agencies will have ghost job listings where they'll get a bunch of people to submit resumes and CVs and things like that, not fill the position, and then relist the position 3 to 6 months later. However, this does not happen on the job sites themselves. So you would be better served going to the sites themselves and also networking. Huge thing. IRACDA is really good for that. The yearly conferences we have gave me a lot of connections with some people at Rutgers and some people at Emory. So I've been able to talk to them about potential roles in both academia and industry, where people are looking for individuals with my skill set or other various skill sets. So definitely keep that in mind. Keep your interests broad and varied, because while we might fall into these positions all need something that we have to offer, and IRACDA has prepared us in a way to offer various skill sets and talents that we possess to these positions. So keep an open mind. vary your job search, and find out what is important to you that you want to do and accomplish with your career.
I'll add too, for my type of position, it kind of narrowed down to either networking, so knowing someone who shared it, which is how I found it, or kind of targeting the universities that you wanted to be at and just kind of actively maintaining it. Like, okay, every week I have these 8 schools on my list. I'm going to click through their postings and see what fits, which is not an ideal system, but that's what I found works. And I want to plug here too that we have an open assistant director position if anyone wants to come to California. If they filled it, then if one of you fills it, then we could have a full team of IRACDA alumni, because also one of my colleagues is Jorge Avila, who's from the Rutgers IRACDA program. So that's my sales pitch too. So you can find it on the UCLA website.
That's awesome. Thanks, David. Anyone else want? Oh, go ahead, Antonio.
I'm just gonna say, I think I'm gonna list David as the point of contact for that when I apply.
Kaitlyn, I think you had mentioned OLAS.
Yes. So if you are interested in any secondary position in New York, it's a site called OLAS, OLAS, and that is where I did find my current position. I have seen other research teacher positions listed on there. I actually do know that Jericho, which is like Long Island's top school district, is hiring a research teacher right now. That was kind of blasted out in the community because the Long Island high school research community is actually very, very small. And it's really nice. I'm getting a little off topic, but there's a research consortium of Long Island teachers who kind of get together and talk about challenges, connections, all that stuff. So she blasted out, Jericho's looking. I don't know if they require the master's in teaching, but they'd probably be happy to have a PhD. So if you're looking for that. Yes, thank you, Diana. That's exactly what it is.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So there's a question here that I feel to my core. And the question is, does imposter syndrome ever go away after graduate school?
I'll tackle this one. No, of course not. It never goes away. Get used to it. It's the backseat passenger. But what does get easier about it, though, is in recognizing that a good number of your colleagues, and especially your students and coworkers, are also suffering from it the exact same way. And how it manifests for them might be a little bit different for you. But ultimately, no. I mean, there's always going to be that sense of, am I doing what I need to be doing? Am I in the right position? Did I somehow magically end up in this way? And if I'm not careful, it can all go away. There's always some aspect of that. But I'd say ultimately it changes its flavor, right? It's no longer about publish or perish. It's no longer about, your science is breaking down, or, you're not going to get that exact result. It's a little bit more of, can I actually see myself in this institution? Do I see myself as a part of this cohort? Do I really have the skills that I believe I have to bring to this? And are they relevant, and are they going to keep me relevant? But yeah, it's get used to it. Hate to say it, but get used to it. Imposter syndrome is real.
I was hoping there was some kind of a magic pill. I mean, it would be nice to get rid of it.
Yeah, I'm just gonna piggyback off of Antonio a little bit. Yeah, it doesn't particularly go away. However, you can mitigate how it affects you by understanding it. And so and this is just my personal opinion. I have not read research on this or anything, but I personally think that imposter syndrome is a consequence of the Dunning-Kruger effect, in that the more knowledge you gain about a particular topic, the more you realize you don't know around a particular topic. And so imposter syndrome comes in when you start to realize all these things that you don't know. Maybe I missed something. I don't deserve to be here because I don't know as much as everyone else. There's always something I might not be getting, but that is a result of you knowing so much as it is. And so if you can acknowledge what you do know, and by knowing what you don't know, you know that you can educate yourself on that topic, because you wouldn't be in this program if you didn't deserve to be here. You wouldn't have gotten the PhD if you did not have the requisite knowledge. So you are not an imposter. You are among people and colleagues like you who have the same degree of knowledge that you do. And like Antonio said, you know, everyone deals with it to some extent or the other. And there are some people who are very confident in being loud and wrong. And so as long as you understand how it affects you and how it affects how you show up, you can learn how to mitigate that and control that for yourself. So no, it doesn't go away, but you learn how to decrease its effects with time.
Thank you for that. So another question is, what role did, if any, mentorship and professional networks play in your career trajectory?
I touched on this a little bit already, but so I found my current position through LinkedIn. And the reason that I found it was my current boss, who's one of the assistant deans on campus, when I was a graduate student, she had reached out to me to, fill a teaching position that now I'm the director above. So she told me that the reason she reached out to me during graduate school was because my LinkedIn profile picture was me smiling and I was a UCLA, biology grad student. So that was enough that I got the meeting with her. I interviewed for it. I decided I was too busy, didn't take the offer at that point. But we connected on LinkedIn, and then 5 years later, that connection is what led me to my current role. So that's my little networking did directly land me this position, essentially, or at least get the opportunity to my doorstep.
Yeah, I can add on to that. I definitely think that not only the connections I had from mentorship and teaching at Stony Brook helped me like get this role, but also like during my PhD. But my connections and professional network from 10 years ago when I got my master's in teaching also helped me get this position. So I thought like it really speaks to trying to maintain your professional relationships because I don't know if anyone knows Karen Goff, who's amazing at Stony Brook. She was one of my recommendations for this current position because they wanted something more related to teaching than research, as well as my mentor that I student taught under 10, 12 years ago now at Northport High School. They both helped me get this position. So just like maintaining a good relationship with them for all this time, I felt bad. I was like, I need you again. but I'm very grateful they did it and they were happy for me and I stayed in contact with them. I still very often talk to my mentor who I student taught under at Northport. So it's like come in handy to have that professional network in each kind of sect of my career path so far.
Thank you for that, Kaitlyn, and also David. So I have another question, which is, do either of you, any of you, have any regrets about not continuing along the traditional path?
I mean,
Absolutely.
honestly, I get to do research without having to write grants. So I have no regrets. It's really, I think it's the key is really finding the sandbox you want to play in, right? So it's not so much of worrying about being in like looking for the grass is always greener or trying to find some ideal. It's about finding the place that actually makes you feel like you're at home and that you're comfortable and that you can be as productive as you want to be. Nerd out as much as you want to nerd out, or try to inspire as many minds and people and coworkers as you can.
Adonis, were you going to say something earlier?
No,
and then
Jennifer,
Jennifer,
you
I see that you unmuted too.
Go ahead, Jennifer.
Oh, yeah. So I have absolutely no regrets. Honestly, being embedded with all the faculty around me makes me regret it less and less every day. There are definitely like little pieces that I miss, like the flexibility and the hours, for sure. And then there are things like, oh man, it was really fun doing like coding and analysis, but I've actually managed to find ways to kind of integrate that in little ways, to kind of bring it back, and I get to teach in like a practical lab course. And I think like, I feel like my position is flexible enough that I can bring in enough pieces that I miss to satisfy the things that I miss, which is not a lot of things. So
So we'll take the next question, and that is, do you still have to keep up with literature in your line of work? And do you have any advice for those who have trouble reading scientific literature?
I'll say that I don't have to keep up with scientific literature. I do, I mean, the science part, I do a little bit because we have like a talk series for our students where they present, and I love going to their presentations more so than invited faculty because I never enjoyed going to those presentations, but that like kind of keeps me more involved, and especially because I work a lot with grad students, and being able to know what they're working on and stuff like that I find helpful for just talking to them. So the being on a campus to some degree makes it easier. So I'm like, oh God, I really don't want to read papers, but you can like just go to talks in different departments because you're still in an academic setting. But I do so like reading education papers, and I also go to like this, we have a STEM education like group that meets every 2 weeks. And so I also am terrible at reading papers. And so I have to block off time for myself in my schedule every week to just make myself do it. And I take a lot of notes because I instantly forget everything I read all the time.
So it's not just me, is what you're saying, Jennifer. Go ahead, Kaitlyn.
I can add on to that. I feel like in my position, I do and don't need to keep up with the literature. I do in the sense that I have to encourage my students to. But our program has almost 100 students all doing different things. So the one really cool thing is it's allowed me to branch out. I'm sometimes reading papers on like a random worm that can biodegrade rubber. And then sometimes I'm reading papers on like this tiny little organism I never heard of that can like, that's invasive. I don't know. Like, it's just like, I'm branched out. I don't have time to read all the papers relevant to all my students' projects. So like I get little bits and pieces, but I do have to teach them how to be able to read the paper, which is a challenge. So it's been interesting because it definitely comes very naturally to some people. And I wasn't one of those people either, but I know the students that I can go say, find a paper, come back to me with the answer to this. And I know students that like, I'm like, come after school, we'll sit together, we'll dig together and try and find the answer to this, because I know they just need a little more facilitation to do that. So again, like I haven't really had to keep up with it myself, but I do have to stay relevant for each student. So it's interesting. And I do like over the summers, I like to try and read like more pedagogy stuff, but during the school year, I don't have time.
Yeah, I can tack onto that too. So I think I'm in a very similar boat to Kaitlyn, where we're dealing with a bunch of research students. There's also about 100 kids in our program, 25 of which I'm leading on 24 different independent projects. And it's impossible for me to keep up with all of what they're trying to do. But what has gotten better is my ability to skim. Right, I have a student who comes to me with an article and goes, I can't make sense out of this. And I go, up, 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 up. All right, here's where you want to focus on. Here's where, here's the nugget of information that we're looking for. Take that and let's move on. But I think this actually goes into a little bit of that earlier question about work-life balance. I still define myself as a scientist, even though I'm now a science educator. And because of the nature of the program, I actually sometimes will have my students be like, you guys got to go and do work on your own. I'm sitting here hashing out this piece of code and trying to figure out how to analyze the sequence data myself. If you want to figure it out with me, we can do it together. And then that usually scares them away. But oftentimes, I do sometimes need to work on my own skills and carve out that time for myself. And it also serves as, I think, to kind of like emulate the role that you're asking them to also try to take on. So am I good about being up to date about the literature? By no means. Do I throw a paper every once in a while to try to keep myself a little sharp? For sure.
I might have a slightly different perspective on this because while for this particular role, we are not required to keep up with scientific literature, we are required to keep up with regulatory documents. So, for example, NSF just released their new 207 some odd pages of how they want their proposals to be submitted. And so it is up to us to keep up with those minor changes. For a slight example, in previous submissions, they will want PIs to come up with a mentoring plan for their postdoctoral scholars whenever they submitted a proposal. With this new update for 2024, the PIs are now required to give updates for postdocs and their graduate students. So now it's just a basic mentoring plan for all of their mentees as opposed to just postdocs. So those are the kind of things that we have to keep up with when it comes to like looking at regulatory documents and things like that.
Thank you for that. I have one of these questions that was submitted earlier, but I also want to make sure that if you're in the room and you have a question, we answer your questions. We'll prioritize your questions. But here's a question that we have, which is, what is the most rewarding aspect of the work that you currently do?
I think oh, sorry, Kaitlyn, were you going? I saw you on mute too.
I feel like I'm talking a lot. You go first.
Oh, I mean, for me, it's certainly working with the students. That's kind of, I think, why most of us went kind of the general paths that we did. So getting to see the students as they improve and they go through, challenges and persevere and come through the other end. There's one program that I work with specifically that I alluded to before. It's a 6-week summer boot camp for students between their first and second year of undergrad from underrepresented backgrounds. And we kind of introduce them to I give molecular biology lectures in the morning, and then they go and they actually get to do it in the lab in the afternoon, and they're with me 6 hours a day, 4 days a week for 6 weeks. So I spend a lot of time with the students, and it's just a fun transformation, seeing them going from kind of scared and intimidated by the process at the beginning to, okay, I'm determined, I know I want to join a research lab on campus, and I'm less scared to do it because I've met, Dr. Gray, and I've met the grad student that runs the lab, and it kind of demystifies science for them a little bit and makes it feel more approachable and inclusive, and they're kind of ready to go and tackle it. And then they know that I'm a resource for them afterwards. So I get to hear about them. They check in every so many months if they need a letter of recommendation or just to tell me how things are going in the lab. So that's what's the most rewarding for me, is working with the students and getting to see how they benefit from the work that I've put in. That's what I enjoy.
I was basically going to say the same exact thing. It's just so rewarding to see students grow, whether they decide to stick with science or research at all. Either way, I love, I am in a cool position because I teach freshmen through seniors. So the freshmen that started with me 2-3 years ago are now juniors about to go into their senior year. And I've been able to teach them all 3 years, and just seeing where they started to where they are now, the schools they're thinking about going, the ones who are going to go into science and research, and even the seniors that graduated last year, they'll just text me, I just took a really hard exam in biochem, but I aced it. They still just want to talk about science and nerd out sometimes with me. So it's just really cool to have these connections with students and watch them succeed and grow whatever they go on to do.
So I can chime in here as well. I've got 2 quick anecdotes to share. One, my intro class deals with usually students as young as sophomore age in high school, which, we're talking at most 15 to 16-year-old kids. And a lot of these kids aren't just, in fact, developing. I mean, these are children, these are not adults and ready to do anything else yet. And sometimes these kids actually come into my classroom without ever having had biology before. So it's interesting to try to teach them how to do biomedical research and molecular biology when they don't have a background in basic molecular bio in the first place. But to that end, the first month or so of the intro is a boot camp of sorts, a molecular biology boot camp. And I'd say one of the most satisfying things I have to say is that when these, 15, 16-year-old kids go through my boot camp and learn how to deal with just basic biology, and then turn around and take the PSAT, and they come back in snickering at how ridiculously easy the science section was, considering I was just having them read primary science articles and actually like break down results, introduction and whatnot. They were like, these questions on these high school exams are so rudimentary. It's unbelievable. That's what they expect us to be able to do as high school students. So for me, that's one of those like real moments of like, yeah, well, we can raise the bar even higher and even higher. And look what happens when you try to reach it. You realize that it's actually not that difficult. So that's one of those things that I find really satisfying, is realizing that I'm kind of giving them tools that they didn't even realize that they would be, first of all, immediately able to apply, but also secondarily gives them, I don't know, a real cool sense of pride in their ability to handle these, other things in high school. The second one, the second anecdote actually comes from a student of mine who's been working with a collaborator, where his project is essentially trying to do genome editing in sea squirts. He's interested in trying to identify genes that are involved in regulating regeneration and metamorphosis. And basically, in working through the collaboration, goes through the whole design process of making his CRISPR guide RNAs. And when he submitted his materials, they were supposed to be in like this orientation, but for whatever reason, the file that got sent to the supplier, the sequences were in the opposite orientation. So a clear mistake. It wasn't exactly sure who did it or where it happened, but there's a clear identifiable mistake. So that when we went through and found his results and saw that the CRISPR did not work across the board, except for maybe 5% of the time on this one spot, it was essentially a waste of, well, not a waste, but it was an expenditure of about $1,000 to find out that the experiment didn't work. So he was crestfallen, disappointed, heartbroken that like this is 6 months of work and now it just did not work. In taking a look at the 5% that did work, it turns out that he inadvertently discovered an active non-canonical PAM site for where CRISPR can actually work, and has demonstrated for the very first time that these secondary sites are actually active in a whole other model organism. So as a result of his mistake, or the mistake that happened on his project, he ended up finding the first evidence of non-canonical PAM site, and now we're actually publishing his mistake as a real result. So it's one of those things where it's just like, I love science. Even your mistakes can be turned into something really interesting and cool. So, honestly, the most rewarding part about this is the access to be able to find those moments to really enjoy the beauty of science, and really allow students to be able to connect to that, I don't know, sense of wonder and epiphany that really, sustains a lot of us through trying to go through our own research projects.
That is so powerful. Both of those examples are pretty powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that. I felt like a warmth come over my heart when you spoke about that discovery. So here's another question for you. What advice would you give to someone who's finishing up their PhD, but still isn't sure what they want to do? They know they don't want to go into the typical tenure track PI position.
Go hike the Appalachian Trail, come back after a couple of years, and then you'll know what you want to do.
I would say don't be afraid to take a position that's not necessarily exactly what you think you want to do. Because I mean, obviously plenty of people here have gone through some circuitous paths, but you know, if you take a position, you're like, okay, I think like I can learn a few of these skills and it also may help clarify some things. And you can kind of just use that as like a stepping stone to something else. So basically, like it's totally fine that you don't have everything figured out right now. I certainly don't.
I think a postdoc too is it keeps the most doors open. I mean, there's challenges too, certainly, that come along with postdocs. So I'm not saying it's a universal, blanket recommendation for everyone. But if you really have, no idea, the postdoc leads to a lot of different off-ramps to a lot of different things. And I've never come across an employer who looks disfavorably at a postdoc. So that kind of can buy you some time as you continue to grow and cultivate your career, if that's the right fit for you. So that's my 2 cents there too.
I'm just going to piggyback off what Antonio said, the whole hiking thing. It's kind of tongue in cheek, but there's a lot of value in such a sentiment. And what that communicates is that figuring out what it is that you want. We kind of keep coming back to this theme, figuring out what you want, figuring out what you're good at. So for example, if you're just finishing your PhD and you find that you're really, really good at NMR, or you really, really love cell culturing, or you're really, really good at transfections, there are roles out there where people need support and assistance for doing those types of experiments. One of the best roles, again, in just my personal research that I found for recent PhD graduates, are field and technical application scientists. And that it builds off of your PhD research experience by focusing on the technique that you're really good at, assisting other researchers in optimizing their experiments and figuring out what they need. And then you go out and make presentations. So you also get to develop your networking skills, your people skills, your presentation skills, your scientific knowledge and background, all within a role that's designed around support and not research at all. You won't actually be doing any direct research. So it's, again, just looking inward and figuring out what about the PhD process did you really enjoy? What about research did you really enjoy? And then finding a role out there for you. Because one thing about having a PhD is that it opens more doors than it closes. And you are not limited to necessarily just science or just teaching. You can go into business, you can go into engineering or computer science or data science, or tech, whatever, field that you feel that your strengths are best in, pursue that. And that, always comes back to looking inward and figuring out what it is that you need and you want out of your career.
Also, just to like combine almost what Jennifer and Adonis were just saying, and Antonio, don't be afraid to take the job, and you might hate it, and then you don't want to do that. I had that experience with medical writing on paper. I was like, this sounds perfect for me right now. I want to work from home. I love making PowerPoints, and that was like, I'm really good at editing. I'm really good at writing. And like everyone said, like, oh, it'll be really good for you. And I just hated it so much. And so then, it steered me back to where I knew my heart did lie. But like on paper, I thought that was like gonna be such a great job for me. And it wasn't. And it's okay. Like I look back, I don't regret it. I did gain some skills and experience. And I knew now, like, that will not be what I ever do again.
I do
Yeah,
want to.
I would actually.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, and I think this is actually a good opportunity to give a real good plug to programs like IRACDA. I mean, honestly, if you're finishing your PhD and you don't know where you want to go, you could do worse than to actually find a really supportive community that is helping to develop you as a professional and not just, hammer you into some kind of scientific shape. I think so much more of the value out of a program like IRACDA is that it makes you more of that well-rounded and appealing character and candidate for all of the additional training it actually gives you.
Thank you for the plug, Antonio. We're actually hiring right now. So for anyone interested, talk to us. You can reach out to me or Lisa or Diana. So we have a question here as it pertains to transitioning from the traditional academic path to a role in educational leadership. What advice do you have for someone who might want to make that transition? What are some things they could be doing now to prepare? And while you guys are thinking about it, I want to make a plug for the professional development unit in the graduate school, because we do have our PhD career ladder program that runs, and it's a peer-led program, and it's all about career exploration. And there are groups that run that are with PhD students, and then there are groups that are with postdocs. And it's really teaching you a model for exploring careers. So while you're going through it, you might be looking at a particular career, but once you learn the model, you can use it at any point of your career to really help you figure out what you want to be when you grow up.
All right, so I think I can start to tackle this question about leadership. So it's really an interesting thing. Like, you can't just walk into a position and entirely be expected to lead. There's something towards building the relationships, really maintaining careful relationships, because oftentimes you might end up in a position where your immediate supervisor is not necessarily as adept as you are, not necessarily having the PhD or the education or the training that you might have had. So oftentimes, those real people skills that being able to help you to work well with others and to quote unquote lead by example are really, really useful to keep in mind. But the other thing too is that leadership also takes all different forms. So for example, there are some people here who are administration versus some people here who are more faculty. Like, I would say arguing going into administration is more, direct leadership skills where you're moving up a chain and, actually dealing more with the human resources aspect of managing people. And I think in my particular part where, my title is as lead biomedical scientist, it just means that I'm basically the biomedical scientist. But at the same time, within our structure, I'm also the lead for our subject team. So within our school, we have the different departments like English, languages, and science. And then within science, you have like the biology subject team or the physics subject team, and we have the research subject team. So in the last year, I've been asked to be the lead for that to help with our horizontal alignment as well as vertical alignment throughout the department. And I found that in the end, it then ends up being the kind of thing where it has, how should we say, it's kind of hard to put in words, but it seems to have a lot more meaning for the other people who perceive you in that position than what you're actually doing as part of the position itself. So there's a bit of it in terms of being in a bit of a leadership position is, again, just kind of like leading by example, being there for other people and being able to help maintain really good relationships to make sure that, really the heart and the mission of what you're trying to accomplish in whatever you're at is something that everybody keeps in sight, right?
Thanks, Antonio. So here's another question for you all, and we're going to be wrapping up really soon. So if there are any lingering questions in the audience, please, now is the time to let us know. What did you find most challenging in your transition, and how did you overcome the challenge?
So I think one of the biggest things that I had to get used to in this role was uh, learning how to read regulatory documents. Reading scientific literature is definitely a skill set that you cultivate and build over time, but there are lots of different forms of documents that you're going to encounter depending on the career you go into. And so, learning how in some regulatory documents from, say, the NIH might have details about how they want the specific aims written or how they want the project description written. But then in a section dealing with the budget or in a section dealing with how the awards are given, they might have additional details related on how you might need to write specific aspects of the aims or the proposal. So learning about those intricacies is definitely something that you would have to get used to. And all positions like that are just going to have a generalized learning curve. So just going in with an open mind and being able to be flexible in what you're willing to take on and adapt to in your roles is really important.
I can say my biggest challenge is bureaucracy. I talk a lot about the student side of things, which is the part of the job I enjoy, but I'm also an administrator, and it comes with a whole slew of challenges that are sometimes feel like banging your head against a wall. We have these grants that are to fund students for summer experiences, and UCLA has been offering summer research experiences for whatever, 50 years or something. Should be easy, right? To get money that is for students to students. It's not. It's so many emails and taking things up the chain. We're writing our second letter to the chancellor right now to get administrative support. That's been an adjustment for me. It's a very different type of frustration than sometimes the research frustration that it can be when things don't work. So that was one of my challenges. And then I think the other one that was one that I've more overcome, because bureaucracy is a constant beast that's going to be there forever, was just like the first time that I had a classroom where I wasn't really given much instruction. It was more just like, okay, here's your 12 students, you know their names, they're enrolled in a journal club, they're all in different fields, go ahead. And it was, I certainly was prepared for it from my training from IRACDA and in graduate school, but it was a very different feeling where it's just like, okay, here's the classroom, go. And it had no, I had no background from what had been done in the past. I didn't have a co-instructor that time. It was very free form, and the other challenge was that the students they were in very diverse fields. So it's hard to get meaning out of a journal club where you have the computational chemists presenting to the biologists and vice versa, and nobody really understands each other's fields. So it took some tinkering to try to come up with a format that everyone would benefit from, and then kind of growing the confidence, having now done these journal clubs every quarter for the last 3 years. So that was kind of a challenge and adjustment as I started out too. It was a bit intimidating at the beginning.
I can also add on bureaucracy for sure, but also I think as a graduate student and a postdoc, of course, the lab you're working for does depend on your research productivity to some degree, but ultimately, you're most responsible for yourself, and your choices will impact you the most. And I think getting into my position now, I have 100 students relying on me. I have other people in the department relying on me in a larger way than I was used to as a grad student and a postdoc, where, of course, it was basically me and my PI talking most of the time. She gave me a lot of freedom. It was just like a wonderful, flexible environment where she was so supportive. And here, I do have support, but I also have needy students relying on every decision I make and the timeframes in which I do things. So I think that structure was for sure an adjustment for me, and kind of also goes back to me trying to draw lines, because if I worked like I worked in grad school for myself, for all of these students, I wouldn't have any life at all. So I think drawing the lines and realizing I do have to prioritize to adequately support all the people I need to support with my decisions has been something I'm still getting used to.
For me, I'd say one of the biggest adjustments actually was coming in. They recruited me as a research scientist, who's somebody who could do research and somebody who could teach other students how to do research. But that doesn't mean that the administration or your coworkers see you as a research scientist. They see you as a high school teacher. So it's one of those things where every once in a while I will kind of find myself rubbing up against the wall of, but wait, the project, the science, it still is always about the students, but oftentimes I'm kind of shocked that it's like, yeah, well, we hired you because you have your research experience, but we hired you to be a high school teacher, right? And it's a little bit of me trying to figure out exactly how do I, as a person who, sees myself as a staunch scientist, fits into the role of being a high school educator. So that's been the biggest one, is trying to figure out how do I, as my square peg, how do I fit into this round hole, so to speak.
I just want to add, and Tony, you brought that up or triggered something for me. Definitely being in an administration position, especially one that is new, I don't want to say like lack of respect, but maybe like not a quite full understanding or appreciation for what my position is, and kind of getting left off of a lot of emails that I should be on and left out of conversations that I should be involved in. And I do have like the faculty that I work most closely with, I feel like very supported by, but it was a lot of also like I need to, and I still need to work on advocating for myself. And, you know, when I get left off, having to say like, hey, like, please include me on these emails and things like that. And talking to, you know, a department chair, being like, hey, can you bring up again and mention like the types of things that like people should be including me on and things like that. And I think the second thing that has been a real challenge for me that I'm still actively working on is being a manager. It's very different managing an undergrad in a lab than managing an employee under you. And there can be many, many different types of employees that you have to work with. And I think this is something I'm still actively struggling with, but I'm having like Brown offers like some leadership training, some of which has been more helpful than others. I've had to be a manager, and then I think again it's like finding the right people around me to ask advice for, and also being more cognizant of how I am and have been managed in the past, which I don't think I reflected as much on while I was in it as I do now. So yeah, that's a new adjustment and another thing that you'll just constantly be learning.
Thank you all so much. I feel like we've gotten such rich information around your path, your experiences, the things you've learned and gained along the way, the things that we can do for those of us who want to transition into those types of roles. So I really appreciate all of you for sharing that. Before I toss it to Lisa, who has just about 2 things that she needs to share with everybody before we close out, I just ask that everyone join me in thanking our amazing panel, Kaitlyn, Adonis, David, Jennifer, and Antonio for all of their insights that they've shared with us. Thank you all so much. And I will toss it, before I toss it to Lisa, also, I want to thank Lisa and Diana. Lisa is the program manager for the IRACDA program, and Diana Champney is the coordinator that assists Lisa on this program, and they worked really hard to put this event together, and I want to thank them very, very much. And now I will hand it over to Lisa for the final thoughts.
Thank you so much, Karen. So we do have 2 final thoughts, and as Diana tosses up one of our slides, I do want to give a plug for a program that we do have coming up on April 9th. We have a 101 session on learning how to apply for faculty positions. So if that is something you are interested in, that is on April 9th. It will be hybrid, so we'll be both in person and on Zoom. We will send a follow-up email to everyone who has attended. We'll share the recording as well as several links that have been shared, and we'll include the flyer for that event if you're interested. As you can see on your screen, we have the national map for all of the IRACDA programs. So as much as we are very proud and love our Stony Brook IRACDA program, and there is that barcode will take you to our page, there are programs across the country. There's about 20 different programs. There are similarities in both. Both programs focus on a career in research and academia. You're going to receive that mentored research training as well as mentored teacher training in all of the programs. But there are some varieties. Some programs are 3 years, some programs are 4. The types of partner institutions, so the institutions that you'll have an opportunity to teach at, are going to vary throughout the programs, and the applications and start dates are different as well. But as you can see, there are programs across the country. Each summer, we all come together, which is such a wonderful opportunity for networking. So we do come together. All of our postdocs have a fantastic time in networking with each other, as well as participating in some programming in professional development. So if you are interested in Stony Brook's program, you can take a picture of that barcode. And if you're interested interested in all of the other programs, we will share the link. It is on there as well, but we will share that map with you so you'll have all of the information. If you'd like to talk more about the Stony Brook program, you can email me, lisa.ospitali@stonybrook.edu. My email is on the website as well, and I can help you navigate through the process. As Kaitlyn mentioned, we do have one position currently open, immediate to fill. And then we are recruiting currently for our next cohort, which will start on or around September 1st. These are for early career positions. So the requirement is that you graduated with your PhD within the last 2.5 years. But we can talk details if you have more questions. So once again, thank you for attending today. Thank you to our panelists, Kaitlyn, Adonis, David, Jennifer, and Antonio. It was great to hear from all of you. And thank you, Kaitlyn, for being the fantastic moderator that you are. And I appreciate everyone's time today. So thank you. Have a wonderful day. Have a great weekend. And hopefully I'll see some of you soon. Take care. Bye.